The Ford, Fulbright, the Mellon. These are some of the biggest grants that graduate students just dream about getting. And while I haven't actually won any of these grants in particular, I have been rejected by a couple of them, and they've all given me feedback. So today we are discussing my biggest mistakes so you can develop a more thought out, a better and stronger grant application for your grad school funding. So what I've learned after applying to a ton of grants and getting a lot of feedback is that you want to include as much detail as possible about your research project and what is it about. And this includes not just your major research questions, but also what are specific archives that you are going to be investigating? Do you have case studies, and why these particular case studies? Do you have a specific way that you are collecting data, or what is the data that you are collecting? Trying not to be too vague and really specifying not just that it's qualitative, but what kind of qualitative? Is it interviews? Is it questionnaires? Are you doing a participant observation? These minute details really help draw a picture for the reviewing committee that you understand what your research needs to be executed well. You want to demonstrate what types of data collection is going to answer what types of questions, or what you hope a type of data collection will answer some type of questions. Or what specific archives are you looking into to answer or review specific components of your research? In other words, you want to be very specific about what is going into your research project, how does that help you get to your research goal or your research plan, and then how are you going to get that information? Now, I realize for a lot of social sciences or STEM fields, this first part may seem like a no-brainer, but for a lot of humanities students, this is really difficult because we do a lot of qualitative research, and defining what is our methods or methodology can be really hard, especially if you're very early into your research career. Now, with all that said, if you find yourself very early into your research project or your research proposal and you don't really know all of the details, like you don't know what archives you're going into, or you haven't really defined what your case studies are, I wouldn't suggest that you stress or not apply. Instead, I would encourage you to predict or imagine what it would be. And so what this means is, sure, you may not know the exact archives, but you probably have an idea of a couple archives that you may be able to find good information. Or you may not have decided what specific case studies, but you might be leaning towards a couple of them already. Put those into your grant applications as major parts of your research. And that's because your research can always change. The point of applying to a grant is not to make your research plan solidified and written in stone, but instead to give you funding to explore your research topic. So even though it may feel a little weird or even possibly dishonest, you're not really trying to trick anybody or confuse them. You're really just trying to show them where you're at in your position and what you plan to do. And so by presenting, what you predict you're going to look at, or what you predict will be your case studies, or what have you, then you are demonstrating to the reviewing committee that you have thought about the details. You do know what is most important. You just need more time to reflect, and additional funding can always help you do that a little bit better. And that leads to my next piece of feedback that I received, and that is you need to address what gaps are in your grant application or predict the concerns that the reviewing committee may have. And what this means is, if there are areas in your grant or in your research plan that you're just not too sure about, you don't have enough information about, you don't quite understand what you're going to do, or the information you need you don't have access to, it might feel normal, or at least it did for me. It felt like it was the best thing to do to just not address it and hope nobody notices. But more times than not, in the feedback that I received for these grant applications, these questions almost always came up. And so instead of trying to mull over it or vaguely allude to it without getting into too much detail, you want to address it head on and present a solution. So an example of this could be, if you plan on doing research in a country, but you don't speak the language, instead of completely omitting what your language fluency is, you could address it head on, create a solution, and include it into your grant application. And it would sound something like this. I don't yet have fluency in this language, but I plan to take these courses over the next semesters to acquire the language by this date so I can do field work by this date. In that way, you are demonstrating, I know that this is a core component of my research. I don't have the skill yet to fulfill it, but these are the steps that I'm going to take to resolve this issue. And this can also be in regards to the details that you need to include, especially if you're in the humanities. If you don't quite know what archives, or if you haven't had the opportunity to talk with your, case studies or the people that you do research with, so you have a lot of questions, instead of just vaguely alluding to the community that you're working with or vaguely alluding to archives, you can say, I haven't had the opportunity to travel to this location yet. However, by this date, I plan on doing preliminary research so I can define which archive or which community or what resources that are available for this research plan. So again, it's not about being perfect or having all the answers or knowing everything, but instead demonstrating that you have thought through the nitty-gritty details and have a good understanding of what it takes to feasibly achieve or execute your research plan. So in this way, by addressing the issue and then being solution oriented and presenting a resolution or a way to resolve this issue, you are showing the reviewer committee that you are prepared and you will use this money and this time very wisely if given the opportunity. So the next thing you want to do is to ground your research. And what this means is, when we are applying to grants, the people who are reviewing our grants aren't necessarily always experts in our field. And that means that when we are writing our grant, some things that just come natural to our department or to our field of study may be completely foreign and uncommon for other reviewers. And so instead of using very jargony language or being very specific about what we're doing in a way that kind of is obscure or hard to understand for general public, we want to have our research grounded in larger concepts that are more accessible to a variety of fields. And what this could look like is when you are talking about the data that you're going to collect, really trying to think about what methodologies are you using and what are the biggest scholars that are also using this methodology. Or if you're using very big scholars just generally to help you focus on this topic in a different way, really highlighting the scholars that may be more known or may be more accessible. Now, this doesn't need to take up a big part of your grant, but again, you do want to reference who are you getting your inspiration or your guidance from scholarly wise, and how are these methodologies or these literatures helping you move your research forward or helping you situate your research into a conversation. It's not that reviewers don't understand or don't have a concept of how grants work, but oftentimes they may not understand why the way you're doing it is important or significant or how it is innovative because they don't understand the scholarship. This is really a big deal for people like in my department who study dance, because a lot of people don't understand why dance is important. So by grounding their scholarship into big name scholars or into real theoretical frameworks or methodologies, it helps people understand, oh, it's doing this thing that was done in this scholarship, but through dance, or but through this way, or dance is doing the similar thing as this other thing. So in that way, you're really trying to help people connect the dots and make sense of your research. Now, this one is actually very much connected to the very first point, but it was so important that I thought it needed to be brought up on its own. And that is, you need to present a plan for your research. Oftentimes, we may present a vague list of what we plan to do throughout our academic career or through our research plan. We may say, oh, I will do my coursework, then pass my language exams, do my field work, and then write my dissertation and graduate. And while that is a true trajectory, and it does seem like a plan, it doesn't have enough detail for the reviewing committee to know if it's achievable for you. So what you want to do is you want to demonstrate what is your academic trajectory with specific deadlines and dates. Even if you don't know exactly when you plan on doing these things, by presented projected dates or deadlines, you are demonstrating that you, again, are thinking through this graduate process and that you have an understanding of what it means to be normative time or have good time to degree, and that you are working towards something in a very active manner. So instead of saying that you're going to, go through this trajectory of school by creating strong deadlines. Like by spring of 2023, I will complete my language requirements and my coursework so I can prepare to study for exams and pass my exams by fall of 2023. Then you have an opportunity to really show the committee that you are actively moving to graduate, that you are trying to finish. Because grants are often really worried about giving grants to people that don't seem like they're going to achieve what the grant is asking. So by being very specific, by having milestones, by understanding what a timeline looks like and how you will move through it, you are really demonstrating to the reviewing committee that you are a proactive student that knows what it takes to succeed. And you always want to make sure that you connect the dots throughout your grant application. So all documents of your grant application are part of your greater grant narrative or your fellowship narrative. And what this means is they need to be cohesive. You never want to sound too jargony or too robotic because that's difficult for reviewers to read and understand what is most important. On the flip side, you also don't want to expect your CV or your research experience to just speak for you. As a result, when you are writing for your grant applications, you want to have a sort of narrative flow that guides the reviewer through all of your documents to help them understand what are the most important aspects, what are the aspects that are most useful for your research, what are aspects most related to their research mission or their granting mission, and what are most useful for you to achieving your research plan. These are all fundamental aspects of what the purpose of this grant application is, but what happens often is that we look at each document as its own and not as in relation to others. This also will help you save space. So if you are using each document as a continuation of the other, if you don't have room to talk about one specific thing in the personal statement, you may be able to talk about it in this other part of the grant application. So being very strategic about how you write about it, having all of the documents in conversation with each other, and continuing a cohesive narrative will help also bolster your grant application to show that you are prepared and thinking through how this all runs together smoothly and how this grant is just one piece of the puzzle that can help end or lead to the end of your graduate experience or process. Now, if you're somebody still interested in finding out as much information as you can about grad funding, I would check out my grad funding playlist. I also have a video that talks about my 5 biggest mistakes when trying to fund my graduate program. So I would check that out if you're trying to avoid them. If you found at least 2 things useful in this video, definitely hit thumbs up so others know that this video has good quality content. And as always, if you have questions, concerns, or just want to say hi, leave them in the comments down below. Your shares, your likes, and your comments help a small YouTuber like me continue to grow. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week.